Good afternoon, and welcome to the Way to Wow Show. I am your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I want to thank you for joining me here on Wednesday, August 3rd. I have to think about that. It's amazing that the year is, very soon will be 2/3 over. It's just zooming by. So I want to, before I start today's show, I want to take a minute and remind you about last week's guest, Steve Bram, and he was joined by his wonderful wife, Julie. Steve is a longtime friend of mine, colleague in the real estate business. He's a co-founder, president of George Smith Partners, one of the most active commercial mortgage brokerage companies in the country, regularly doing several $billion worth of business each year. And just recently, they merged with a technology company, and they're looking to bring commercial real estate lending into the vaunted 21st century. So Steve has had an enormously successful career, and I hasten to add, an enormously successful marriage as well. And if those are things that you want, I can't encourage you enough to take a look at last week's show with Steve. He's just, among everything else, just an enormously humble man. And I think you will get a lot out of listening to and watching what he has to say. So you can go to our YouTube channel, of course, The Way to Wow Show on YouTube. And as always, feel free to comment. There's also a link there where if you wanted to get in touch with Steve, you certainly can. Steve does a tremendous amount of work helping other people in both business and community and charitable work. And I know both he and Julie would be happy to hear from you as to how they can help you. So that was last week's show. This week, I'm going to do a solo effort. I've done a few of those over the last couple of months, and that's because I want to help set a foundation for our professional success. So, I remember when I was first a chaplain, I started my chaplain career in the Navy. I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan. So, I mean, I'd been outside of the country before then, but never for more than I think about a week. And as I recall, only once I was in Hungary, I think, for a week. And I've been to Mexico and Canada for a few days here and there. But that's really it. And so all of a sudden, here I am in, Okinawa, Japan, which a very different culture than the United States, and for that matter, than the Western Hemisphere and Europe. Lovely people. It was really kind of an opportunity for me to broaden my horizons. And one of the jobs I took on was what's called the Brig Chaplains. Now, so for those of you who are not a member of what we call the Sea Services, that's the United States Navy, the United States Marine Corps, and the United States Coast Guard, and the United States Merchant Marine as well, I better add. So brig means jail. And as you might guess, a Marine Corps brig was populated mostly with young men, for the most part under 30 years of age, probably under 26 years of age, who committed what I called the big stupid. Things like going out on a weekend, having too much to drink, getting irritated, and putting their fists through the window of the taxi of one of the local drivers. Idiotic, to say the least. These are not, for the most part, they weren't criminals who had robbed or mugged people or worse. Although on occasion, unfortunately, we had those as well. They were young men who had made colossally bad choices, and that's how they had ended up in the brig. And so after being brig chaplain for maybe about a month, I think, most of when you're in the military, if you're sent to the brig, or what they call in the Army, or my dad used to call from the Army, sort of the stockade, right? If you go to jail in the military, there's a good chance that that's also going to be the end of your military career. So, after you get out, you're going to be separated and, sent home. And that was certainly the case for well over 50% of the, again, primarily young men that I worked with in the brig. And so, here they are. Many of them had joined the military, and to better their circumstances, because life was just not going so well. Civilian life was not going so well, and now they're going to be thrown back into civilian life. For the most part, they're not going to have any GI benefits. Typically, the kind of discharge you get after you leave confinement in the military is one that you are no longer eligible for, educational benefits, housing benefits, any, like VA loan, that kind of stuff. You don't get any of those things. So, they were going to be kind of right back where they started from in many cases. And so I decided to teach a class on how to get a job, life after the brig, so to speak. And I was aided. Well, I can't say officially I was not aided, because he was one of the prisoners there. But there was a fellow in the brig. He was I believe he was a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps. And I'm not going to get into the tragic circumstances of why he was there, although he and I became pretty good friends. And each, I believe it was Tuesdays, I used to visit the brig. He would get all the guys there into the chapel where I held the class in order for them to hear what I had to say. And he being a staff sergeant, he commanded a lot of respect, even though in the brig there's no rank and all that kind of stuff. But he would get them all there. And very early on in this, one of them raised, because I said, anytime you have a question, just let me know. So the Marine raises his hand. He says, "You're a chaplain. Why are you teaching about business?" And I was tempted to make some kind of Jewish joke. Hey, look, I'm Jewish, and business and all that. I wasn't quite sure if they'd get that. And I said to him, it's been my experience that when someone is worried about how they're going to pay their rent, how they're going to buy food, how they're going to clothe themselves, or even worse, how they're going to clothe their spouse and children, they're really not particularly interested in Bible study. They have more important things on their mind. That's not true just of, guys who are in the brig. I think that's true for all of us. So until we have, those basic needs met, I forget that, there's that guy, the hierarchy of needs, right? So at the bottom of the pyramid is, shelter, food, clothing, those kind of things. And until people are, I think, reasonably secure in those needs, it's very difficult for them to engage in spiritual matters, or for that matter, I think even in emotional and mental issues and mental situations. So at least in any way that will be at all satisfying for them. So I like to start with foundational issues. That's really where I come from. And so that's why, although I know I've talked about the 3 pillars of attainment throughout the run of the show, we're in season 3 now. I think I did a real short introduction with one of my bartender friends back probably about 2 years ago now, and we talked about it for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. So I want to take a deeper dive into it, so you can really understand how this is relevant, how this can help you organize your life. And when I say organize your life, I don't mean like get your closet straightened out. What I mean is figure out those 2 central questions that we're dealing with here on the Way to Wow show. Who are you, and what you want? Right? Those are the seminal questions for our time. I think for anyone born post World War II, life opened up for us with just an enormous range of possibilities. Prior to World War II, where you were born, the economic circumstances into which you were born. They weren't determinative, but in many ways they did kind of set a life course for you, and it was, you know, more difficult to break out of those circumstances. But World War II showed a lot of people that the American dream was alive and well. It worked. Of course, not for everybody, but you know, coupled with the GI Bill and the sort of worldwide growth that was experienced starting in the very late 40s and into the 50s and on into the 60s, there was so much opportunity there for people who, you know, before that, just it wasn't there for them, or they couldn't see that it was there for them. And so, you know, I'm a baby boomer, so we're the first, you know, post World War II generation. There were just an enormous range of choices for me. And I think it's gotten even more so for succeeding generations. I mean, when I was growing up as a kid, it was understood, you know, you're joining the Boy Scouts, you know, you're going to college, you're going to be a professional, right? And I remember I had just started driving, so I was 16 years old, and I was driving my mother somewhere because this is how it worked in my family. Once one of her children got his or her driver's license, we were now my mother's chauffeur, right? So I'm driving her somewhere, again, I don't remember what it was, and she was asking, well, so, you know, what do you think you want to do, you know, when you grow up? And I said, well, I'm thinking about being a writer. I mean, you would have thought I had said, I don't know, Mom, I want to be a mass murderer. You know, she was like, you want to be a what? You know, and yeah, that was not going to work in my family. So, you know, I finally settled on architect because my mother's father had been an artist, and my mother loved art and she loved architecture, and my dad was an engineer, and so he had all that sort of technical knowledge and you know, the math and the science and all that stuff. And I figured, well, I'll put those two together, that should make both parents happy, which indeed it did. And you know, lucky for all of you out there, I went to architecture school, but I never practiced architecture, and therefore you do not find my architectural designs polluting the, you know, urban landscape. Lucky thing. So yeah, you really don't want to see, you know, my buildings out there. But the education was good. Architecture school was an education in problem solving, and that's a good thing. So and I digressed away from my topic. Sorry about that. So in any event, you know, even when I was a teenager, you know, my choices were somewhat limited, although they were much greater, I think, than they were for my parents, certainly much greater than they were for my grandparents and before them. And again, you know, generations after me, I think, have had even more choices, and that really can make life difficult. You know, my daughter turns 15 soon, and she's been struggling for years, you know, what she wants to do with her life. And I said, well, you know, you don't have to figure it out right now, baby. You've got time and all that. But she just looks at sort of the multitude of options that are available to her, and I think it makes her head swim a little bit. And that's understandable. You know, if you go back to one of my very first episodes on the show, I interviewed Dr. Barry Schwartz, who wrote what is still one of my favorite books of all time, The Paradox of Choice. And Dr. Schwartz's theory, which I think bears out in our own lives, if you think about it, is there's kind of a sweet spot for the number of choices. If we have too few choices, it's very aggravating. But if we have too many choices, it causes kind of an inability to decide. And so it makes it difficult for life to progress. So I think what we need to do is set a foundation for ourselves and then work from that foundation and build up. And that's really what the 3 pillars of attainment allow us to do. So I'm gonna move my drawing over here because I'm not sure if it's gonna. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna bring up an image of the 3 pillars of attainment so we can talk about them. And, you know, it's probably a much nicer thing for you to look at than me, certainly. And here we go. And okay, there it is. So so this is and by the way, if you for those of you who've seen some of the early episodes of my show, the 3 Pillars of Attainment looked different. I revised it a few months ago, and I think that the new version is much more reflective of how life really works, right? And so the biggest change is what the pillars are. So before, the 3 pillars were physical, mental, and spiritual. And one of the things that bothered me about that is there are spiritual, mental, and physical aspects to all parts of our lives. And so I was never quite happy with the way that of those fundamental divisions. And so, one day, like I said, 2-3 months ago, whatever it was, it struck me that what a more sensible division of our lives works out to be, and this is it. So the 3 pillars then are: there's the self pillar, ourselves. There's the relationships pillar, which is the people we interact with. Okay, and forgive me for categorizing God as a person. I know God is God, and he's not a person, but the individuals, I guess, because you could also put pets in here as well, by the way. And then pursuits, the things that we do, right? So those are fundamentally the 3 main categories in which our life develops. And for a while, and when I say a while, for many years, because as some of you may know, I first developed this to use when I was a chaplain in the Navy. I looked at figuring out who we are as a first step from which the others would grow, i.e. in this graphic, it would be, the sort of the top of the pyramid and then working down from there. And I've realized more recently that's not how life works. Much more sensibly, life works from a foundation up. So who we are, I'm not saying we have no, self-identity apart from these other things. Of course we do, but I think it develops over time. Who we are is a product of the influences we receive through relationships and the activities that we pursue. Okay, so if we think about an infant, or let's say a toddler. A toddler's walking now, is beginning to experience the world. So a toddler is engaging in 2 primary pursuits. One is play, and one is learning. And you could argue that for a toddler, there probably isn't a particular, distinction between these 2, because through play, a toddler learns, right? And as a toddler learns, she figures out more ways and more interesting ways to play, right? So these 2, what I call realms, each of the 3 parts of a pillar, I call a realm. So there's interplay between them, right? So out of play and learning comes one part of a child's identity, and through family, friends and a toddler probably doesn't have colleagues, but you could say at some point, schoolmates. Maybe toddler goes to daycare mates, we call it. And if they're growing up in a religious family, or at least a family that recognizes God, so then in some ways, interaction with God, those also help form the identity of that child. Okay, and so these 2 pillars are in many ways the foundation on which our identity pillar sets. And I do think that this is one of the challenges in the world today, is we're trying to create identities that are somehow divorced from these other parts of our lives. And I don't think the identities feel particularly authentic. Okay. And so when we talk about the self, right, we've got health, mindset, and identity as the self, right? So you can say, well, what if, God forbid, a child has health problems? Isn't that going to in some way impact their identity? And I yes, I think that's very true. And mindset, as well. I mean, this is not my area of expertise. So, are we born with a mindset? Is this something that develops environmentally? Is it a combination of both? I tend to think it's probably a combination of both. So there's probably some inherent things that are driving mindset in a child. And then a lot of it is, environmental, the influences, the pursuits that the child has. And those two then also provide a foundation for, in the end, this is what we're shooting for, to understand, who are you and what you want. That's your identity. Okay. And you'll notice in the pyramid scheme here, or the pyramid diagram, whatever you want to call it, I have some words mentioned. So I have the word here, internal. So the self pillar is really something that for the most part is happening inside of us, whether it's our mindset, our health, our identity. These are coming from, they're internal, they're internally derived, or internally, I should say, figured out. And then our relationships and our pursuits are external. So in order to have a relationship, we need to interact with someone outside of ourselves, right? We can't, we can't, we can have a relationship with ourselves, but that really is, that's somewhat of a misnomer, isn't it? Because a relationship implies interaction between us and someone, something else, a dog, a cat, the Lord, what have you. So relationships are external, and as are pursuits, right? I mean, you could say, well, meditation is a pursuit and that's internal to us. Okay. I mean, I'm not gonna argue, a point like that, but for the most part, our finances, that's something that's happening outside of us, whether it's our work, whether it's our investing, our protecting our finances, through, various, financial services, all that kind of thing, that's external to us. Play too is, generally speaking, it's something external to us. I mean, we can play games in our heads, but generally that's not, that has a connotation of something we, shouldn't do, right? So whether we're playing, games on a computer, or we're out, enjoying sports, even if it's a sport you play by yourself, you can play golf by yourself, but it's still an external thing. As is learning. Learning is the confronting of new ideas, the mixing with them, the attempting to understand them, to ingest them, and to make decisions about which ones are going to be a part of us and which ones are not. So those are external pursuits, right? As opposed to, again, our health, that's internal to us. There are external things that impact it, but our health is, our body, our mindset, our minds and spirits make up our mindset. And then our identity, things like our values. Okay. So those are internal to us. We need to figure all those out, and people can influence them. But in the end, we're alone in these realms. Okay. You'll also notice there's two words on the sides here: purpose and mission. Okay. So when I talk about purpose, what I mean is who you are. You're answering that question, who are you? The first part of the Way to Wow. Way, who are you? And that is too, it's a merging of an internal identity with an external, how we're relating to other people. Okay. So you could say, well, I'm a monk. Okay. That's my purpose, is to be a monk. It's like, okay. Notice though, a monk is still defined in relation to other people. So whether you're going to be a monk who literally separates himself from the rest of humanity for the rest of his life, or whether he's a monk who joins a monastery and he has a fairly cloistered set of individuals that he interacts with, that still is an interaction with other people. Okay, so our purpose is the part of our identity, if you will, that says, who are you? So in my case, I'm a servant of God. I'm a father. I'm a businessman. I'm a rabbi, right? I'm an athlete. Not a great athlete, okay, but I engage in physical activities on a regular basis, and I compete against myself to try and improve my physical fitness, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's my purpose, to be this individual that I've outlined for myself. Okay, and every other day I read my statement. Well, actually, I take it back. Every day I read my statement of purpose so I can remember, I can understand who I am. And it does change from time to time. Okay. So I don't think our purposes are set in stone. What I do think is the older we get, the better we understand this idea of purpose. And so the less need there is for it to change. We become more comfortable with who we are. Okay, so that question, I don't think that question ever becomes settled, but it becomes more concrete, if you will. Concrete sounds like it's cast and it's there forever, if you especially put steel in it, right? So maybe that's not a good word, but it becomes, instead of it being sort of a free-flowing melted plastic, it becomes free-flowing rubber, right? It becomes more like a rubber ball. You can it's still malleable, but in general it's keeping its shape. Okay, the other side is our mission, and our mission is what we want to accomplish in the world. So our mission is an activity, if you think of it that way, and it combines ourself with our pursuits. Okay, so in my case, my mission is to help people live better lives using as my primary tool the 3 pillars of attainment, right? That is my mission in life. Now, by the way, I have many submissions, not submissions, submissions, missions that make up the overall mission, right? And I do those through a number of ways, one of which is this show. So in part of my mission is to help people live, to help people find a way of making money that is more fulfilling and that meets their financial needs, right? So I'm not coming from this from the standpoint of, everybody should want to make $1 million and they should devote the first 20 years of their life to making money. That's not where that's not for me to say. Now, I know people that's what their choice is and that's what they do, and good. So I'm absolutely delighted to help them in that mission. I know other people for whom, as long as they have enough to meet their basic needs and the basic needs of their family, that's really all they care about. And that's, I think, equally admirable. And I'm equally happy to help people who look at it from that way as well. So I'm not here to dictate what your success looks like. What I'm here to do is help you get that success as you define it. Okay. And so that's my mission. What I've found is, by understanding my purpose and mission, I'm much more comfortable making decisions throughout my day and more, over a longer time period throughout the years of my life. And it also helps me make decisions. So if someone presents me with an opportunity, my first question is this opportunity in line with my purpose? And is it in line with my mission? Okay. So if someone comes to me and says, excuse me, Kevin, I'm working on this project and it's going to make a ton of money. Don't really care how it impacts people. It may help some people. It may not help other people. Don't really care, but it's going to make us a ton of money. Okay, well, there you go. So I already know, based on understanding my purpose and my mission, which together, the pinnacle is my identity, that's not anything that I want to be involved in, because that doesn't meet my mission, and it's not the kind of person that I am, to look at money as being the sole factor in measuring the success of my life. That's just not me. For other people, that may be their mission, and okay, good for them, right? Again, this is not, I'm not suggesting any particular purpose or mission is better than any other, although obviously there are some that are better than others. I hope nobody has as their purpose, to be the best criminal who ever lived. Gosh, that would just be, sad. And their mission is to, steal all the gold in Fort Knox. Wow. I hope none of you have that identity, because if you do, you're going to be disappointed by this statement, I suppose. That is not a good purpose and mission. Okay. However, I will say to have the purpose and mission of being, someone whose sole purpose in life is to be a, multi-billionaire, and their mission is to make as much money as possible, no matter what its impact on humanity. To be honest with you, I think there are people like that out there. I don't understand how they can sleep at night. That's me. Okay. So how does this all then work together as we look at building a foundation for ourselves, especially in the context of our professional lives? Well, so if we're going to build successful professional lives, well, it's true, we're probably going to need to be healthy, and our mindset is important. I've mentioned this to a few people over the last week. I was listening to, I mentioned this actually in my last show. I was listening to this motivational speaker, and he said, I really believe in being positive, and my goal is to be able to think positively for one entire day. Right. So I'm not saying that mindset isn't important. Of course, mindset is important. However, I think that this was the case for me. I got too involved in thinking, well, if I just have the right mindset, everything else is going to fall into place. And I don't think that's true. Mindset is a factor that impacts our ability to pursue those things that are worthwhile for us pursuing, and for building relationships. So let me give you an example of an issue from the very early days of my career. So I was raised to be, at best, very skeptical of the ethics of wealthy people. And on more than one occasion, my father, who should be remembered for blessing, sort of gave me this idea that anyone who is really, really wealthy, they got that way by basically not being a good person. They cheated people or these kind of things. Now, honestly, it was a belief that kind of got conveyed to me when I was a child. And I'm not sure, because I never actually asked my father about it later on in life. I'm not sure if that's what he really thought, or if it was just, it was the kind of thing that he would say when he was frustrated with his own, professional prospects, or a particular person he felt taken advantage of him. To be honest, I don't know. What I do know is those statements by him had a big impact on me as a small child. Okay, so then fast forward 26 years later, I start my first business. And in the real estate business, if you want to be successful, you got to deal with people who have money. And here I had this terrible attitude toward people who had money, who were supposedly going to be my clients, which, why would you want to have someone working, on behalf of your financial interests who thought fundamentally you were a creep or a crook or whatever, right? So I realized after struggling for a year or so, my mindset was off. And I started meeting very successful people who not only were very nice people, but they were charitable and they wanted to help me. So one of them was a man that my mother worked for, a guy by the name of Swoboda. Now I'm going up on his first name. God, I can't think of his first name. Shoot. Anyway, he was the president of a thrift and loan that my mother worked for. She was a bookkeeper there. And whenever I would come to visit her, as I was leaving, if I walked by his office, if he was in when I walked by his office, he would ask me to come in and he would talk to me for Robert Swoboda, sorry. He would ask me to come in and he would talk to me and ask me about school and life and what were my interests. And he gave me a book called The Richest Man in Babylon, which I highly, highly recommend. And it's about obtaining financial success. And he was a very, very nice man. He helped a lot of people. He was a religious man, which is nice to be able to say that, a religious person who was also a decent human being. Unfortunately, not all are, right? And he really took an interest in people. He really helped my mother out because when she was working for him, my parents got divorced. That was difficult for both of them. And he was very successful. I can't tell you what his net worth was. All I knew is he was very successful and widely seen in the community as being very successful, very concerned about the people he worked with, very concerned about his community, and just a genuinely good man. There were other people that I met when I was a primarily teenager. Oftentimes they were men that my mother worked for. Another one who actually I also met when she was working for that same thrift and loan was a man by the name of Herschel Brewer. Herschel and I are friends to this day. And Herschel is such a great guy, just, salt of the earth. And he was also quite a successful man. And it really, these were two of the men who were, when I realized I had this, bad attitude towards successful people, and then I would reflect back and I say, well, gosh, were Mr. Swoboda and Mr. Brewer, were they bad people? No, they weren't. They were so nice to me, right? When I was a young guy, a teenager, whatever. So something's wrong here. Either my belief is wrong, my mindset is wrong, or me and all these other people misperceived these two men. And what it was my mindset was off, right? So here's the thing though, oftentimes I don't think we realize our mindset is off until it gets in the way of our pursuits or our relationships. And therein lies the challenge, right? So it's really, likewise, think about our health. It's really easy to ignore our health until, one day you're out, trying to, ski and you can't anymore, or playing tennis or whatever, and you just don't have the ability like you do anymore. So much of our self, I think we learn about as we reflect it off of these two foundational pillars. And I call them foundational pillars just because they're at the bottom of the pyramid, right? So in figuring out who we are, in dealing with our mindset, in dealing with our health, in dealing with the pinnacle there, our identity, I think we need to engage in relationships and pursuits and see ourselves not just as we see ourselves in our own mirror, but also reflected in the mirror of how other people relate to us and how successful we are in these various pursuits that we've chosen, right? So let me give you another example from my life. So I all my childhood, I never thought of myself as an athlete. And my dad, by the way, he was, he was, like he was 6 feet tall, strong. He played football in college. He was a lifeguard in the summers. He knew how to handle small arms. He was a small arms instructor. Outdoor pursuits. He was a Boy Scout, and he camped and all this stuff. He could shoot a bow and arrow, all this stuff. And they were really his passions, right? He loved to watch football, especially, but he loved sports in general. And I never saw myself as an athlete or anything like that. And that was always kind of I think, a disappointment to my father. And so starting in junior high, I was going to a school called Laguna Blanca School. So we didn't have football there, we had soccer. And the two key sports were soccer and baseball. And for the first time in my life, because it was a fairly small school, so like it or not, I had to try out for the JV squad for both soccer and baseball. And lo and behold, I'm scratching my head, right? Lo and behold, I got on both, which meant nothing, of course, because every boy got on those teams, right? But, from my dad's perspective, the sort of it being obligatory for me to engage in these activities really heartened him. And what I found by engaging in these activities was my identity started to change for the better. So, not only did I play those two sports, but then, on recess or whatever, lunchtime, the boys in my class and we'd go and we might play softball or whatever. And I look, I was kind of a wimpy kid. I mean, when it came to running, it was like I was always bringing up the rear and all that kind of stuff. But, so one day we were playing softball. And I was pitching. Don't ask me how I got chosen as pitcher, probably because I was such a terrible fielder, or something like that. And I pitched the ball, and the kid hit a line drive right into my groin. And I dropped, bang. And I hear them screaming, and they're screaming. And out of the corner of my eye, I see a guy rounding third base. And I'm like, oh no, he's going to score a run. My team is going to lose. And I don't know how I did it, but somehow I got to the ball. I threw it to the catcher, and the catcher tagged the guy out. I mean, you would have thought I was, I don't know, Sandy Koufax, right? To use a Jewish baseball example. My schoolmates were incredulous. They come up and they're slapping me on the back. Wow, that was amazing. I mean, after getting hit in the groin, you were able to throw the guy out. And for the first time in my life, I really felt like a member of a team, and I could feel why people, why sports can be such an important part of people's lives, number one. And number two, I also showed myself that I could really kind of grit it out and do something, physical, right? So it was through the engaging in sports that I was able to change my identity. I think if I had said, oh, I'm a sportsman, I'm a great baseball player, or I'm a great softball player, I don't find that wouldn't have been believable to me. And I don't know. I'm not saying I'm like everybody else or everybody's like me. I don't know. Maybe some people, they can come up with an identity in their head and then go bring it into actualization in the, out in the world. But I think many times we need to learn by experience. And so that's why I recommend as you're trying to figure out, especially this realm right here, identity, I think we need to engage in pursuits, really engage, find out what really, this is what you say in the 70s, what really turns us on. Does sports turn us on? Does, racing cars, does hiking, does, going to the movies? That was another thing. I mean, I was already, my dad loved big band and swing music, and so I always loved that. And through that, and seeing old movies and old TV shows and such, I've part of my identity now is someone who just really loves sort of classic popular culture, right? So if you drop by my house, and there's music playing 10 to 1, it's either the Great American Songbook or swing big band music playing, right? And that's become a part of my identity through learning, through in this, I guess, music is more maybe a play thing, but then there's also a learning aspect to that as well. I've studied music and movies and TV and all that stuff, right? So through the pursuits, I've figured out my identity. And by the way, going back to that softball example, the idea that I was able to sort of muster up the ability to get that ball to the catcher and get the guy thrown out, that had an appreciable impact on my mindset. That I was able to do something like that. If you had asked me before that incident, could I have done something like that? I'm pretty sure I would have said no, because I had no proof that I could. After it, though, now, if you were to ask me now if I could do something that I hadn't done before, I'd be much more likely to say yes, because I've seen that I can, right? So that's kind of the pursuits side of things. Here on the relationships side of things, I think in many ways, this can be even more crucial to our identity. So, we start out with our family relationships. And of course, I fully recognize for some people, I would probably too many people, they don't have great familial relationships when they were a child. And they're really, as a result, starting with kind of, one arm tied behind their back, or maybe both arms and kind of 2 feet in a hole or something. And I chuckle. I don't mean to make light of the situation, only my silly metaphors. So the ability to create strong relationships with our siblings, with our parents as we're growing up, is, I think, an absolutely crucial aspect of developing our identity, as well as our mindset and even our health. Because health is not just physical health; it's mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, etc. So, our family is the workshop in which we are schooled, if you will, in how to develop relationships. Okay, and because, unfortunately, too often familial relationships aren't good, so then people don't learn how to have good relationships elsewhere in their lives. Okay, now that's not always the case. I grew up in a time when it was fairly common for a boy to be scared of his father. I think it's a Bill Cosby joke. He tells me, his father says to him, "I brought you in this world. I can take you out. I'll make another one just like you," right? Ha ha ha. But I don't know, and my dad never said that to me, but my dad would not hesitate to correct my behavior if he thought that was necessary, and he was, not particularly, careful about my feelings when he did that. So, it helped me, I suppose, develop some toughness, or I hope it did. That was just kind of how things were back then. In some of the things I learned in developing relationships with my parents, my sisters, my grandparents, really my grandmothers. I never knew my paternal grandfather, and my maternal, I never knew my maternal grandfather, and I didn't know my paternal grandfather very long, although he had a big impact on my life. So these relationships with our family members really kind of set the foundation, right, that we've been talking about. And then from there, we're going to start, developing relationships with friends and colleagues. So, as when we're a child, so we go play with our friends, and, how we play with our friends, again, builds on that foundation that we develop for the rest of our lives. So, the more we can learn in our families about how to create durable, solid relationships, the better we can be about that in terms of developing similar quality relationships with friends and later colleagues. Colleagues could be anything from schoolmates to your fellow Boy Scouts, like in my case, to your people that you work with, or if you are a business owner, your employees or whatever. They all fall into that category. And by the way, and I mentioned this a couple times already, when I think of friends in general, I think of human being friends, but I think I can imagine especially for someone who is shut in, it has difficulty with mobility and such, and they have a beloved pet, a dog or a cat or whatever. So I can they have a friend relationship there. I mean, I hope they have some human friends as well, but I can understand having a friend relationship with a pet. I certainly think I had a friend relationship with my dog Jiggers. We used to, in the when we first were together, we would walk almost every day, and got to know each other pretty well. We kind of knew how each other was going to respond to different things. So I wouldn't say that my relationship with Jiggers was a replacement for human relations at all. But on the other hand, there were a lot of happy moments I spent with my dog, and there were times when either I was very upset or whatever, and I put him on his leash and we go for a long walk, and just the process of watching him kind of explore the world or interact with me, how we used to do, was it was very, very, very useful for helping me kind of calm myself down or get calmed down and sort of get back on track. So so I think that those relationships then also help create our identity. Okay. And I think part of my purpose in life of being a good father really comes from the sense of feeling that while I respect and love both my parents, I think they made some significant mistakes, and I don't want to make those mistakes with my daughter. And so being a father is one of the most important aspects of my purpose in life. And having said that, believe me, I am not the perfect father by any stretch, but it's a crucial part of my identity. And likewise, being a good friend and a good colleague as well. They're very, very important. I highly prize relationships, right? And so the third realm in relationships is God. So look, I think it's reasonable to say that most of us, especially here in the United States, we either have of course it's reasonable to say we either have a relationship with God or we don't, right? Those are the only two choices. Many people in the United States and in other parts of the world as well, having a relationship with God is a defining part of their lives. So you may have heard the term, living a God-centered life. So I do my best to do that. The jury is out on whether I accomplish that or not. One day I'll have, as they call it in the movie Glory, my great getting up morning. May it be a long time from now. And, the heavenly tribunal will render their verdict as to whether I was or wasn't. In the meantime, I do my best to do so. And yet at the same time, one of my closest friends is someone whose life is defined by not believing that God exists, right? And if you go, again, one of the early episodes of my show, I have my friend Michael Hartman on the show. He's an atheist, although he's clear he's not an anti-theist. he's an atheist. So he's talking about his not believing in God. And that also defines his life in a certain way. Okay. And so too, now, by the way, many people who are atheists as adults grew up in families that were God-centered to a certain degree, right? That was certainly the case for my friend Michael. And it was so his embracing atheism was something he did later in life. So I think that, as we look at the foundations of our lives, I think this is another central question. Do we believe in God? Why? How does that impact our lives? Right. I used to do a brief when I was in Okinawa, and I would mention to people that there was an article, I think it was in the Washington Post. So this would have been back in the early 2000s, 2004 or 5, something like that. I think the article came out. It said, 91%, I think it was, or 92%, 90+% of Americans believe in God. It's like, and so then what? Right? I believe in God. Okay. What does that mean, in one's life? Does that mean that you subscribe to a particular code of conduct? Does that mean that you accept certain things and don't accept others? How does that manifest itself in your life? And that is indeed what our relationship with God is about, right? So some people will say, well, as long as I think about God periodically, I have a relationship with God. Okay. Other people would say, no, I've got all these things that I have to do, every day, and I have to do my best to always have God in mind in order to really have a strong relationship with God. Okay, right? My personal belief, and I'm not voicing this to anybody, is that because I claim to have a relationship with God, so then when I am interacting with my family, interacting with my friends and colleagues, when I'm pursuing my financial endeavors and doing my learning and playing, all of these have to be done in a way that reflects positively on God. Okay. As well, then my relationship with God becomes part of the foundation of myself and indeed my identity. So when it comes to health issues, when it comes to mindset issues, which in the end are so crucial in determining our identity, how God factors into those is an ongoing consideration. Okay, so as we move on and we have more guests on the show, I hope you'll refer back to this episode from time to time and think about how actually doing things, building relationships, pursuing our pursuits. And I know in the show we're working primarily here in finances, but how we pursue our pursuits, how those will help us create our identity, which in turn then will reflect back on our relationships and our pursuits. So if part of our identity is being a kind person, for example, well, so then we can be kind to ourselves, of course, but then we also need to be kind to our family, our friends and colleagues, kind to God, kind to our pets. And we also need to be kind in the sense of, in this sense, maybe it'd be more accurate to say decent in how we handle our finances and how we play the game, right? And how we do our learning, right? And so there's somewhat of a cycle here, and then there's a cycle here, right? And of course, there's a cycle here as well. Our relationships impact our pursuits and vice versa. So all three pillars work together. They work in pairs, okay? These two support, the relationships and pursuits support self. Self in turn changes the way we view our relationships and how we pursue our pursuits. So it all works together. And if we're trying to figure out who are you, what do you want, I recommend you start with some activities and see how those impact you, how they make you feel, how they make you think, how they impact your mindset, how they impact your health, especially your mental health and your spiritual health. And then how all these things together then add up to an identity in terms of your purpose, internal, your mission, activities. Okay. And if you need any help with any of this, feel free to reach out for me. There should be a ticker going by the bottom of the screen for the whole show, giving you my email address where you can contact me. Feel free to do so. It'll also be in the show notes for this episode that'll post after we end the show. So thank you very, very much for watching. I really do hope that you found some really nourishing food for thought in this. And I just want to wrap up by saying two things. One is, if you think you would be a good guest on the Way to Wow show, if you have a remarkable way of making a living, or you know someone who has a remarkable way of making a living, please let me know. Drop me an email or go on any of our social media. The links will be in the show notes, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, and let me know about them. I'd be happy to talk with them, talk with you about being a guest on the show. That's number one. And number two, as I always do to sign off the show, I want to remind you about my very dear friend, Marie, and just say, Marie, darling, you are still my belle. So thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.